ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another hands down DFS video. Ryan here, and we're going to change things up a bit for week 5. We're going to speed it up. There are 12 games on the DraftKings Main Slate, and we're going to take a minute per game and try to break down the entire slate in just 12 minutes. So let's get started with the Saints and Washington football team. This isn't going to be a high scoring game, but you might be able to find a lot of value in it. Washington's defense is not as good as they were last year, but it's not because of their run defense, which has looked solid. It's because of their pass defense. And the New Orleans passing game is just going to be very cheap and very low owned. Marquez Callaway is on the field 85% of snaps and is tied for second on the team for targets. If you want a punt option, tight end Jawan Johnson has found the end zone 3 times this year and leads the Saints in red zone targets. I'm not interested in the Washington side of the ball at all. Gibson's facing a tough run defense. Heineke's going to struggle, and he lost his second best target in Logan Thomas. McLaurin should get a lot of targets, but he will be double teamed, and there's better receivers at his price. However, both the defense I think we can consider. Over to the Patriots and the Texans. Another very low scoring game, over under 39. But the Patriots side of the ball is intriguing. Damian Harris is coming off 2 bad games, a negative 4-yard game and then a 14-yard game, but has also faced 2 of the better rush defenses in the league. For his 5,500, you can get a guy who should get you about 18 carries, and his team is favored by a touchdown. Meanwhile, wide receiver Kendrick Bourne is pretty cheap at $4,000. He only needs 12 DraftKings points to return good value, and he's averaging 16 over his last 2 games, and his team didn't score more than 2 touchdowns in those games. And then you also have Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, the 2 tight ends for the Patriots, who are going against the worst tight end defense in the league so far, and both are very playable. In GPPs, you want to play who you think has a better chance of scoring a touchdown, since I don't think it's going to be a very high volume game for either of these guys. And then over on the Texans side, just don't touch them. To Detroit and Minnesota, where Minnesota is favored by a whopping 10 points. This game's going to be very one-sided, of course, with the Vikings scoring a lot. So the question is, what do we do with Dalvin Cook here at 8,400? He's questionable, looks like he's going to play, but was limited in practice. But this is a team that's going to run up the score, and Detroit just gave up 3 touchdowns to the Bears running backs. However, since the Lions will be playing down the whole game, DeAndre Swift I have some interest in. He'll be able to put up a lot of points catching the ball out of the backfield and should get a solid work on the ground. In the passing game, the Vikings are still going to score a lot, whether it's Dalvin Cook or their wide receivers, and Adam Thielen's just a touchdown machine and is very cheap at $6,600. He has a very favorable matchup against a cornerback who's being targeted on 37% of routes run against him. If you don't think the Lions can do much offensively, then I think you can play the Vikings defense at just $3,000. If you do think the Lions score at least a few points, Goff is pretty dirt cheap at $5,300 and will probably throw the ball about 40 times. You should come in very low owned, so it could be worth the GPP play and wouldn't kill your cash lineups at that price. To the Dolphins and Bucks, another game where the home team is favored by 10 points. Brady is the second highest priced quarterback on the slate, and his team has struggled, and he has struggled historically in his career against Miami. Instead, I like the run game with Leonard Fournette at just $5,200. He's seeing the snap count, he's seeing the volume on the ground, and he's seeing plenty of targets through the air. Meanwhile, Miami's giving up the second most DraftKings points per game to running backs, and they're averaging almost 5 yards per carry allowed. With Fuller back on the IR and Devontae Parker banged up in questionable play, the 2 remaining Dolphins pass catchers, Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki, have both seen increased volume in the recent weeks and are sub 5K and sub 4% owned. I'd advise against the Bucks pass catchers this week, but if you do want a piece of Tom Brady's weapons, Godwin out of the slot is probably the way to go. The slot is the one place where teams have had success against the Dolphins secondary. I like this game as a secondary game stack a lot. I think there's great value, and it should be a high-scoring game. To Green Bay and Cincinnati, I think this is going to be a fun game, and you'll probably want a piece of it. It's got a total of 51 points right now. As far as QBs go, the Bengals defenses look pretty solid, and Rodgers is expensive for a guy who's usually only throwing the ball 30 times a game. Burrow's at his highest price of the season, but has yet to hit his true ceiling. But he's going to be very low owned, and if Mixon is limited, we might resort back to the 2020 Joe Burrow, and he might be throwing the ball 50 times at $6,100. If that's the case and you like that, where do we go for Cincy wide receivers? For me, all signs point to T. Higgins. He has the best matchup, best cornerback matchup. He's at the cheapest price, and he's projected the lowest ownership of the three main Cincinnati guys. However, all three of these guys are cheap, and you can make plenty of stacks with Burrow and run it back with Devontae Adams, who's still being targeted on 36% of routes. Joe Mixon is questionable. Looks like he's probably going to play today, but he's a super talented running back. He's coming at very minimal ownership. If he's going to be limited at all, we'll obviously fade him, but if he does play without limitation, I think you need to put him in your GPP player pool at this low price. For Denver and Pittsburgh, this one's just going to be short and sweet. It's got an over-under of 39 points, and there's only 3 plays I'm considering. Najee Harris and the 2 defenses. Najee's apparently going against the top defense in the league against the running backs, but he's also a big part of the passing game, so he doesn't have to rely on that ground volume and groundwork to pay off to make value. I consider him only in GPPs, though, not so much in cash. Then the Steelers wide receivers, just too pricey. Broncos just don't throw the ball as much to consider playing any of their pass catchers. So really, for me, Najee Harris and the 2 defenses. Flipping over to Philly and Carolina. Hurts and Darnold are averaging almost the same amount of points, 4 weeks through the season. I think Hurts is long-term viable for this points. We can't expect rushing touchdowns from Darnold every single game like he has so far this season. Both teams have solid, not amazing, but solid defenses. And I just think that Darnold is going to be too expensive. Hurts, meanwhile, has a very much safer floor than Darnold does, so I like him more. Meanwhile, for wide receivers, DJ Moore is 4th in the league in targets and has the best cornerback matchup of any pass catchers in this game. However, Carolina can definitely stuff Miles Sanders. I think Philly, is definitely going to be passing the ball close to 40 times this game. So Devontae Smith at under 6,000, 5,900 here is also very cheap. And additionally, we're getting the resurgence of Zach Ertz, who at $3,400 is playing close to 60% of his snaps, 60% of offensive snaps, and has the 3rd most targets on the team. If you do need a punt option for this game, I talked about Quez Watkins a bit last week as a big play threat, and that still stands. He received a career-high 7 targets last week and is still just sitting at $3,600. For the Titans and Jags game, bow down to King Henry. This is his game. This has a big Derrick Henry game written all over it. However, at $9,000 and likely close to 25% ownership, fading him in GPPs may not be a bad play, but I still do expect points to fly around in this game. With Julio Jones out, we're getting a pretty cheap A.J. Brown here at just $6,500. A cheap Laviska Shenault here at just $4,800, especially without DJ Chark. But I think Marvin Jones might be my favorite play on the game at $5,700. He's shown to be Trevor Lawrence's go-to guy. He's projected to come in at under 5% owned and has the best cornerback matchup on the Jags. There are plenty of cheap pass catchers on the Titan side as well. Chester Rogers, Anthony Firkser. They've proven to be solid targets for Tannehill the last few weeks. However, I do think the Titans offense runs through Henry, so I don't think we consider Tannehill. Meanwhile, Trevor Lawrence looked much better against the Bengals last Thursday than he did earlier in the season, and this is the easiest defense he'll play since week 1, so I think we can keep him in our GPP player pool and take some shots on him. To the Bears and Raiders. Fields didn't need to do much last week in his first start to beat the Lions. He will have to this week to beat the Raiders, who have looked pretty solid, and he's just $5,200. I think he's a great cash game play. And then with Montgomery on the IR, Damian Williams is going to take over the lead back duties at $5,600. DraftKings really did price him up, and I don't feel very comfortable playing him as the Bears are probably going to be playing from behind the whole game. Over to wide receivers, Hunter Renfrow has been as consistent as ever and is under $5,000 still. The Bears may not have the mighty defense that they have in the past, but they've been able to limit opposing running backs this season. Renfrow's second on the team in both targets and red zone targets, trailing just Darren Waller. And speaking of Darren Waller, here at $7,300, he's very expensive, but his ownership is projected to be very low, under 5%. And considering Darren Waller is capable of getting 15 targets and breaking a slate, I think he's, you definitely want to consider him in GPPs. On the Bears pass catching side, my favorite guy is Mooney, who is neck and neck with Robinson in target share this year, each at 24%. And Mooney is coming in $800 cheaper. For the Browns-Chargers game, another game that I think should be fun, Chubb's price just keeps on falling, and his volume is still there. He's just 6,700 now. He's had back-to-back weeks with 20-plus carries. Meanwhile, the Chargers are allowing over 5 yards per carry on the ground. He's coming in at a projected 5 to 10% ownership, and I have a lot of GPP interest in him. The rest of the plays fall on the Chargers pass-catching side that I like. Keenan Allen's at his lowest price point of the season, but has yet to see less than 8 targets in a game. And he's definitely a threat at 6,500. And then meanwhile, Mike Williams has the easiest matchup in this game. Cleveland has a solid defense, but I think both of those guys are capable of, returning value. For the 49ers and the Cardinals, another fun game, over under 48. Arizona's 5-point favorite. Trey Lance getting his first start of his NFL career, $5,700 in the second to third highest scoring game on the slate. His rushing ability is going to give him a very safe floor. Plus, with that high scoring game, he should get some work through the air. So I think he's got a very safe floor at this price. I also really like Kylie Murray at 8,000. Yes, he's the most expensive quarterback on the slate, but he's averaging 3.7 times value at this price. And that's about what we need him to do to pay off. I think he goes even higher this game against the 49ers, who are allowing almost 400 total yards per game. And then if you like Murray, you obviously have to consider the stack with DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins hasn't had a massive game this season, but he's still been on the field for 95% of snaps. He's getting a 20+% target share, and he's going to face off against Mosley, who's being targeted in 30% of routes run against him. And then on the other side of the ball, Deebo Samuel, he's tied for DJ Moore for fourth most targets in the league, and it's just $7,100. I think that's a good play. And then if you're looking at value, AJ Green, 5,100, is being targeted at a 20% rate, second most on the Cardinals, and also has the second most routes run behind Hopkins. And then for some deep value at tight end, if you want to punt, George Kittle's now in the IR, so we get Ross Dwelly, who's starting at $2,700. When Kittle does play, he normally is on the field for 97% to 100% of offensive snaps. If the 49ers are going to run that same offense and Dwelly's going to be on the field for 95+% of snaps, I think he's just way too cheap to not consider at $2,700. And for our last game of the slate, the rivalry, the Giants and Cowboys. Cowboys a 7-point favorite, highest over-under on the slate right now at 53. And Ezekiel Elliott is just way too cheap at this price, considering the Cowboys are now starting to lean on the run game more. He's been super efficient with his carries, and he should get even more carries against the Giants than he did against Carolina's defense last week. Barkley also has had a bounce back couple of weeks after a rough week 1 and 2, but it's hard to pay $300 more from him when the Giants are going to be playing from behind, and you got Elliott sitting there at 7,000. Speaking of playing from behind, with an over-under of 53, Daniel Jones has been just a fantasy star this season, and it's just $6,000. He looks very enticing. I think he's got a safe floor at that rushing upside, and again, high over-under, guy playing from behind. This is just a great price from him. And if you do play Jones, the one guy you have to play is Golladay. With Sterling Shepard and Darius Slayton out, Galladay's the big man for the game. He'll be shadowed by Diggs, so he doesn't have a great matchup, but he should be able to pay off this price purely based on volume. And then we also saw last week, Kadarius Toney got some work with those two guys being injured, and I think that continues into this week. He's a big play threat at $4,000. And if you want to stack this game, either on the Dallas side or the Giants side, I think Kadarius Toney provides great salary relief and is capable of a 15-point game or so. Whew. Okay, we made it through. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions about the slate, let us know. Follow us on Twitter at HandsDownDFS to get our official Week 5 Hands Down DFS lineup. And hit that subscribe button to get all our Week 6 content that will be coming out next week. Thanks, guys.